Welcome back to the podcast, Unbinding the Bible. This is episode 142, Politics, the Nations, and the Powers. And in this episode, I would like to bring together two streams of thought, both of which reference how it is that the powers and authorities exert their influence over nations and national thought, as well as how Christians unknowingly get caught up in that influence. Over time, the reduction of the Christian religion to private matters in the heart has distorted Jesus' intention that the kingdom of God would affect every area of life, including public life. By relegating the Christian religion primarily to private matters of the heart, Christians have lifted their eyes to their political party and to their nation to do God's public and social work in the world, imagining that this has been God's intention all along. The trouble with such a move is that it far too often, the church then ends up serving the ends of the state, plays by the state's rules, and uses the state's means in an attempt to bring about godly ends. But the kingdom of light doesn't advance by means of tools belonging to the kingdom of darkness. And so what I believe the church needs is a reorientation to the ways of God, the God who rules as a lamb, as well as recognition of the ways they have been duped by the powers and authorities. So much could be said about this topic, and throughout this podcast, much has already been said. But this episode will tie together a few themes from our study of Revelation, particularly Revelation 5, as well as one of Paul's most famous exhortations from the book of Ephesians, chapter 6 in specific, about the powers and authorities. I hope that it will tie together for you, as it has for me, the intricate dynamic at work between the church's hope in following the way of Christ and the constant temptation by the powers to use earthly means to bring about heavenly ends. This is a topic that I personally believe the church fails not only to live out, but even to understand. This episode is yet another in a long line of my attempts to correct this failure. The two streams of thought that I plan to bring together both come from Joel Lawrence. Joel and I became friends online several years ago, and his insights continue to give me language to put to the contradictions and deceptions I see every day coming from large swaths of the evangelical church. Joel is the executive director of the Center for Pastor Theologians. He previously served as the senior pastor of Central Baptist Church in St. Paul, Minnesota, and as a professor of theology at Bethel Seminary. He holds a PhD in systematic theology from the University of Cambridge, and he is a member of the St. Anselm Fellowship of the Center for Pastor Theologians. So the first thing I'd like to do on this episode is read an article that Joel published on his blog at the start of Russia's invasion of Ukraine, called The Lion Who is the Lamb, Reflections on Revelation 5 in a Time of War, published February 28th of this year. I then want to follow it up with one of Joel's Facebook posts, where he continues the theme of the influence of the powers when he cautions the church not to fall prey to its schemes. I'm very thankful for Joel, for his influence in my life, and for his permission to read his article on this episode. And so without any more of an introduction, let's just jump right into it. The Lion Who is the Lamb, Reflections on Revelation 5 in a Time of War, by Joel Lawrence, published February 28th, 2022. Over the past few days, as I have watched the scenes of war coming from Ukraine, and as I have prayed for and communicated with my friends in Ukraine, I have found myself turning to the book of Revelation. I don't turn to Revelation to read it as a code for deciphering the particular events of this evil invasion, or to determine whether or not this war is a sign that the end times are near. To do so would be to abuse the purpose of Revelation. Rather, I turn to Revelation to allow this remarkable text, one of the most astonishing pieces of literature ever written, to do just what it is supposed to do, to anchor my soul in the eternal vision of God, to put the terrible temporal events in eternal context, and to hear the word that gives the church the conviction to persevere in following Jesus, even as evil runs riot on the earth. In particular, I have found myself reflecting on Revelation 5. In this chapter, John the Revelator is standing in the throne room of heaven. He's been taken up from the island of Patmos through a doorway into the realm of God to see the world and history from the vista of eternity. In chapter 4, John sees the 4 angelic creatures and the 24 elders around the throne, crying out, "Holy, holy, holy," as they bow down and worship the one who sits on the throne. Then in chapter 5, John looks and sees a scroll in the hand of God. The scroll has writing on both sides and is sealed by 7 seals. In Revelation, the scroll symbolizes the mysterious plan of God, his hidden purpose in the vast sweep of history. God is the Lord, and his ways are not our ways. His thoughts are not our thoughts. We cannot discern the mind of God through the events of history. His ways are beyond our finding out. So the scroll is the symbol of hope, of understanding, of insight into the mysterious purposes of the mysterious God. To understand God and his purposes, to live in hope amid evil, the scroll must be opened. After he sees the scroll in the right hand of God, John hears a mighty angel proclaim in a loud voice, "Who is worthy to break the seals and open the scroll?" In other words, who is worthy to reveal the purposes, plans, and ways of God? Who can show us the mystery of God's ways? As John looks around the throne room, none step forward because none are found worthy, not in heaven or on earth or under the earth. None of the created beings in all the cosmos are worthy to open the scroll and unlock the mystery of God's eternal purposes. When none are found worthy, John tells us that he wept and wept. His weeping is the sorrow of chaos, of the unknown, of a world lost in disorder. His tears are the tears of apparent meaninglessness, of the fear that evil will win, of the world in disarray, with no prospect for being made right. If none can open the scroll, there is no hope. But as he cries, an elder who sits around the throne speaks to John and tells him not to weep. For behold, there is one who is worthy. The Lion of Judah has triumphed, and he is able to open the scroll. As John looks on, the lion is there, but he is not a lion. Instead, the lion is a lamb, who stands at the center of the throne, surrounded by the 4 living creatures and by the elders. The lion, who is the lamb, steps forward and takes the scroll out of the right hand of him who sits on the throne. And when he had taken the scroll, the chorus of heaven sings a new song, saying, "Worthy are you to take the scroll and open its seals, for you were slain. And by your blood you ransomed people for God from every tribe and language and people and nation, and you have made them a kingdom and priests to our God, and they shall reign on the earth." He is worthy because he was slain, and his blood is the way of freedom for those who are captured by the forces of evil and are slaves of the powers and principalities that dominate this age. Having been freed from these powers, the ransomed become a new people, a new nation, a kingdom and priests to our God. The Lamb gathers to himself a new society made up of people who transcend national boundaries, who have been redeemed from the earthly powers of human rebellion, that they might be citizens of a new and distinct kingdom. The Lion who is the Lamb can open the scroll because he is the revelation of the mysterious purposes of God, the one through whom God does his work in history, the one who reveals the very nature of God. His opening of the scroll tells us that this one is the center of God's hidden purposes in history, that he is the one around whom history revolves. And the Lion who is the Lamb confronts all human attempts to be lords who shape history through our own powers and projects, who believe that we are worthy to open the scroll because of our strength. Throughout history, the nations have believed that they are the drivers of history. Believing this, the nations have claimed that they are worthy to open the scroll as those who are the fulcrum of history. The nations have honored themselves by believing that through them, God is working out his plan, that God is accomplishing his purposes through their military strength, that their financial power reveals God's blessing. The nations have believed that they are God's instrument to achieve his purposes. Russia has long believed this. America has long believed this. The nations have long believed this. The nations equate earthly rule with divine blessing and see their power to direct the course of history as the sign that they are God's vessel for accomplishing his purposes, and so believe that God will favor their weapons over the weapons of others. But the nations stumble on the truth of Revelation 5, which reveals that the one who is worthy is the Lion who is the Lamb who was slain. At the heart of our Christian discipleship is the seeming contradiction of the Lion who is the Lamb. However, Revelation declares that the Lion who is the Lamb is not a contradiction. He is the revelation of the mystery of God, who overcomes the powers of the world through the weakness of the cross. In him, we find the revelation of the mysterious purpose of God, which is not to dominate through military might or to establish supremacy through weapons of war, but to ransom humanity out of the jaws of predatory violence through the blood of the Lamb, who establishes a kingdom which is not of this age. Too often, the church has been confused about the lion and lamb imagery, believing that Jesus was a lamb at the cross, but is now a lion who conquers through violence. Believing this, the church has endorsed the idea that God works through his leonine powers of conquering nations, at least through our conquering nation. But Revelation does not say that Christ is at times a lion and at times a lamb. It calls us to hold these two seemingly incompatible images as one. The lion is the lamb who was slain. Revelation 5 declares that God's way of triumph is the way of the crucified lamb. God gains victory through weakness. God triumphs through the foolishness of the cross. The victory of the lion is through the lamb who was slain. As the kingdom and priests, the church is called to be the presence in history of the lion who is the lamb. As I pray for my brothers and sisters in Ukraine, as I pray for Christ's church around the world, I pray that we will be anchored in the throne room vision of Revelation 5, joining the chorus of heaven and proclaiming that the Lamb who was slain is worthy, and so persevering in our witness to the Lion who is the Lamb. I really appreciate Joel's insights as he writes from Revelation chapter 5. And if you remember way back, I think it was in episode 66 or 67 or 68, we were in that section of Revelation looking at the Lion who is the Lamb. And Joel, in my estimation, is exactly right when he reveals that the God who is the Lion, who is the Lamb who was slain, reveals his purposes in the world through the Lamb who was slain. And Jesus himself does earn the right to reveal to us the unfolding of history and what history will be like. And I'm really thankful for Joel, because Joel makes a helpful distinction in reminding us that we oftentimes think at times God is a lion and at times God is a lamb. And we do imagine and have imagined, sadly, ever since the days of Constantine, that the way God is ruling now is as a conquering lion. But a reading of Revelation, as you have listened to, if you've listened to this podcast, is to recognize that the word lion shows up once in the book. At least in reference to Jesus. And the references to the Lamb as it pertains to Jesus show up 28 times. And so it is not a mistake or a misnomer to imagine that the way God chooses to exercise his rule on the earth is as a lamb. And I think that this is important for us. I think that this is important for the church. I think it's important for us to remember this as we talk about politics, as we look at the nations, that our God chooses to meet us in the midst of our suffering. And it isn't that we are siding with him and asking him to favor our weapons over the weapons of others. It's very unsettling for many American Christians who believe somehow that America is unique and is special in the eyes of God. It is very unsettling for them to realize that every nation in the world has adopted language similar to the language America has adopted in order to justify their military exploits. Germany has done this. Russia has done this, is doing this. Rome did this in the first century. Every single nation loves to imagine that the gods, quote unquote, or God himself is in favor of what it is that they are doing. And they quickly lose sight of the fact that their earthly agendas are not going to be baptized by Christian language to automatically make them God-sanctioned. And I really was thankful for how Joel put it when he said that we then end up believing that they are God's instrument. Each nation, we are God's instrument to achieve his purposes, and that we equate earthly rule with divine blessing and see their power to direct the course of history as the sign that they are God's vessel for accomplishing his purposes, and so believe that God will favor their weapons over the weapons of others. And this, I think, has long captured the hearts of mankind, and that is the belief that God's ways can and will be accomplished through military strength or through financial prowess or through whoever has the loudest voice and the biggest stick will get their agenda across. And I think that the lion who is the lamb who was slain is crying out for his own followers, his own kingdom of priests, to recognize this is what it means to conquer. This is what it means to rule. This is what it means to be victorious, and to not fall prey to Rome's and Caesar's and the beast's way of attempting to get people to imagine ruling is done through violence and coercion and manipulation. And so I told you I was going to bring together two streams of thought, and I do want to do that. I picked up just a post that Joel had put on Facebook not too long ago, and I just wanted to quote it. He makes a reference to Ephesians 6, which I thought was fitting to some of our discussion about the principalities and powers. But this one's really short, and then I'll just wrap up our time for this week's episode. But Joel goes on to say this: we talk a lot about the church speaking truth to power. The problem is when the church is bent on having power, it betrays our motives. We speak truth to power so we can have it. Biblically, though, to speak truth to power is not to critique certain uses of power, but to confront the powers and principalities and deny them their reality, as Christ did on the cross. This is what Paul means when he tells us that our struggle is not against flesh and blood, but against the rulers, against the authorities, against the powers of this dark world, and against the spiritual forces of evil in the heavenly realms. Until the church puts our mission in the cosmic frame, detaching it from the temporal and political frame, we won't know how to engage the temporal and political as faithful witnesses of the lion who is the lamb who was slain. Now, that may have been a mouthful. I know that wasn't maybe quite as clear as the article. Joel sort of took his time in laying out exactly what he wanted to get across. But what Joel's pointing out here is, I think, really important. And I know in political, or rather partisan discussions today, the church does always imagine that the way their agenda is going to be accomplished is when their man or their woman or their congressperson or their candidate is put in the seat of power, so that it's that powerful position who's going to be able to make the most influence. In fact, I'm pretty certain, at least verbally from many Christians that I know, this is one of the reasons they justified, even if they didn't love his vocabulary or necessarily his lifestyle choices, justified voting to put Donald J. Trump in the office of president, because of this belief that we need to be the ones who have the power. And what's happening here is that this whole concept of power has gripped the hearts of Christians. It's gripped the hearts of Christians to imagine the way you fight violence is with violence. The way you fight aggression is with aggression. The way you fight manipulation or the threat of manipulation is through manipulation. The way you fight, we play the world's games according to the world's rules and imagine that we are bringing about God's ways on the earth. And the lion who is the lamb, who rules not in spite of being the lamb, but rules because he is the lamb, counteracts all of that. It removes all of that from the focus, and it dares to suggest that a homeless guy in the first century who was crucified by Rome took down the principalities and powers driving the Roman machine and defeated that machine by allowing them to kill him. This is such a contradictory concept to everything you and I understand about what it even means to be an American citizen, which is why it's important to continually make the distinction between what it means to be a good American and what it means to be a faithful Christian. Because I know, and I'm well aware of the fact that people have put these two things together, but they blur the lines of both when you do. And what is happening is the temptation is always there to get the most votes or to get the biggest persuasion or to have the greatest opportunity to overturn the law. We need to do whatever is necessary in order to make this happen. And I do believe that the powers have duped the church into believing that those with power are the most influential people. And therefore, the way to do God's work in the world is simply to put Christians in the positions of those with the most power. I would like to submit to you that that is entirely backwards. And as I said, Christians end up then serving the purposes of the state, using chaplains in the military to basically say to those under your care that the decisions the military makes, for example, are justified. Because of course we want to know and we want someone to vocalize for us that the decisions the state is making have divine backing. And that's a really difficult thing to do honestly or with integrity when the Bible itself lays out Jesus as not only the one who is capable of revealing the purposes of God, but because Jesus most fully reveals who God actually is and our God doesn't change, then we realize that the way God will choose to continue to unfold his purposes in the world will undoubtedly happen the same way he originally brought his purposes in the world. And this is why the lion who is the lamb who was slain is such a powerful image. It challenges every notion deep within us that the powerful people are the ones who are going to make the greatest difference. Jesus would disagree. The kingdom and the advancement of the kingdom is always done through the weak and the insignificant and the seemingly irrelevant, marginalized, or sidelined people. The church is not called to be the big influencer, to be the mover and the shaker. The church is called to truly believe that the marginalized, the oppressed, and the overlooked people are the ones who actually matter in God's eyes and are the ones through whom God will do his greatest work. And they are a group who is faithfully living that belief out in the midst of a world that is obsessed with power and fighting for power and standing on one's rights and refusing to back down from arguments and deciding that I will either win the argument or we will cease to be friends. That is the way the world is going right now. And it is a destructive force of the powers and authorities wreaking havoc on God's good world. The church bears witness to the lion who is the lamb by rejecting the allure for power and prestige. I mean, you remember when Jesus himself was tempted by Satan in the wilderness, one of the temptations was that Satan would give Jesus all the kingdoms of the world. Imagine how that temptation might have gone down. Jesus, think of all the influence you could have over the entire world. I will give you the platform. I'll give you the seat. I'll give you the office. I'll give you the opportunity and the advantage and the inroads to all of the biggest figures on the planet. Imagine how rapidly you could spread the good news of your kingdom if you had a voice in the corners of every single seat or every single parliament or every single government that ever existed. Jesus, think of the influence you could have for the kingdom if I gave them all to you. When Jesus rejects that, understand what he's doing. He is deciding that God's ways are not man's ways. Which is why when Peter voiced man's ways, he rebuked Peter as, "Get behind me, Satan, for you are a hindrance to me. You are not setting your mind on the things of God, but on the things of man." And we like to make that distinction that, well, the things of God are certainly clear and the things of man are really rotten, but the powers are sneaky. And they will blur these two things together in such a way that it becomes very difficult to separate them. And I would like to submit to you today that one of the primary ways that the powers have influenced us to fail to separate the ways of God from the ways of man is this subtle and yet very strong, almost irresistible pull to believe that those in power are the ones who are going to make the most difference for the Lord and for his kingdom. And the book of Revelation undermines entirely what power actually is and does, and it rewrites the script for us. And the play on words that Revelation uses with the word conquer, the beast is both said to conquer the saints and to be conquered by the saints. And the idea in Revelation is that we have to decide at the end of the day, whose definition of conquering have we bought into? Have we bought into God's definition of conquering as the lion who is the lamb who was slain? Or have we bought into Caesar and Rome's view of conquering, which seeks to destroy our enemies, to outmaneuver them, outflank them, and get our agenda across? That's what we have to ask. And of course, it's not a totally black and white thing. There are a lot of nuance to these kinds of discussions, but we have to be open as followers of the Lamb who was slain to have some of the deepest rooted values in our own hearts and minds questioned. For us to make sure on a continual basis that we have not drifted away from what it was we originally signed up for. Because it does not look at all like it looks in the world. And deciding that the difference between a Christian and a non-Christian is just that Christians go to church on Sundays and sing hymns, whereas non-Christians sleep in, that's a gross misunderstanding of what the unique identity is that God has called us to. He's literally called us to live out the age to come in the present. And knowing what we know of the age to come, living a life of peace, living a life of love, living a life of compassion, and of self-sacrifice is not at all what you and I see going on around us today. And I will tell you, in the middle of those times, it's incredibly difficult to live out the age to come in the present. It is much more tempting and much easier to fight fire with fire, to lash back, to unfriend someone ourselves, to quit talking to somebody, to withhold forgiveness, to dig in our heels and refuse to move. But Jesus has called the church to something different. And it affects every area of our lives, in the political realm, in the way we view our nation, and in the way we live our lives as the church. So thank you again to Joel Lawrence for your permission to use some of your material on this episode. Thank you to you listeners who have faithfully tuned in each week. I've noticed Maybe you've been sharing this with your friends. This week, there were several new listens that I don't normally get this many downloads in a given week, but I've noticed a bit of a spike, and I hope that's not accidental. I hope that's intentional, but if it is, thank you for those who've shared these episodes with a friend and have encouraged them to listen in. I'm very grateful for you and would love to continue a dialogue. If you have any questions or concerns, you can reach me on Facebook. You can find me on Instagram at the Unbinding the Bible podcast. You also can email me at unbindingthebible@gmail.com. So that's all we have for this week. I hope you have a fantastic week, and I will talk to you next time.